My name is Alvin Ashford. My colleague at the back wearing the red tie, blue shirt is Liam Corish. We both work for the Investors in People service. As you can imagine, people strategy is massively important to us, but more importantly, well-being is a fundamental of a strong and effective people management strategy. So we're working very hard with Yoke Consultancy to ensure that we're attaining the right standard for well-being.
Yep, and good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel Arkle, Director of Yoke, and Nikki, my colleague who's consultant at the back, give us a wave, Nikki. We'll be leaving some of the sessions, so as Alvin said, we're going to walk you through, as a partnership today, how to create an effective well-being strategy.
So the first place I thought it would be good for us to go is to build on what we've seen this morning. This morning we've had some good data and information about what good well-being looks like, where we are, what the landscape looks like. So 97% of leaders believe that an effective well-being program is critical to their success. Okay? We've got 50% of HR professionals engaged with the well-being concept. 50% of professionals, some of you may be in this room today, that's our organisations, 50% of us believe that our organisations could do more around well-being. Okay? And last but not least, you've got 78% of HR directors believe that well-being is something that will be reported on by 2017. Tomorrow will be November, so we're getting there quite quickly. Okay? So with all this information that we have to hand, we still find that, well-being programs can be quite ad hoc, reactive, non-evaluative, and not aligned to the organisation's strategy. But the good news is we came here today to discuss an opportunity. Okay? So it's quite important that the first thing that we begin with is a clear strategy. We believe that this is fundamental to an effective well-being program. Okay? But what we're quite aware of is that this can be quite a daunting subject. Well-being is quite personal. It can be quite personal, but at the same time, it can also be an afterthought. As we mentioned, it was quite reactive. So today, the key areas that we want to focus on is, what does an effective well-being strategy look like? Okay, how can we ensure that it meets the needs of all the individuals in your organisation? And then, why leadership support is paramount. We've heard that already today. Mind mentioned it. And it's probably something that you're going to hear time and time again throughout today because the influence that leadership has on our organisations. And last but not least, what can be done to maintain and improve upon the current practices that you have in place? So what I'll do is I'll just briefly run through what our session looks like today. Step one, an effective well-being strategy will take 10 minutes to go through that. Step two, this is the area that we're really going to focus in on today. We'll spend 20 minutes doing this, is meeting the needs of the people in our organisations. We'll spend 5 minutes looking at leadership support, and last but not least, we'll look at 5 minutes of maintaining and improving well-being. So, over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. Also, just at the end, if there are any questions, do feel free to interrupt us. We're quite casual in our approach, so we don't want it to just be us talking at the front. But there will also be a formal slot at the end for any questions. So I guess, why did we decide to work together? There are a lot of people in the industry emerging, whether that be particular methodologies, such as you've already heard about the Workplace Wellbeing Charter. There's also a lot of unknown about well-being, and we found that a lot of our clients are quite confused about what even the word means, let alone how to do something about it that's effective. So hence we decided to partner up, and if I can put it politely, Investors in People are sort of like the police of the industry. They come and say, are you doing the right thing? And I've just heard that there's not only gold standard but also platinum that you can try and achieve. So it all sounds very exciting. But how to do that? Yoke comes in. Personally, I've got a master's in organisational well-being, but also we have a wide team, and we effectively work together to help people get to these standards. And it is unknown, and it is new chartered territory, so we want to kind of also play the humble card. Because don't forget, well-being is an experiment. We'll come on to more about that at the end. But effectively, by the way that we work together, we're on a mission to empower you, to empower your people. And that's where it becomes different. Because in the past, so many things have been outsourced. It's very difficult to outsource well-being, and it has to be authentic in the way that you approach it. And if you don't do it in an authentic manner, it effectively goes down like a lead balloon. So we effectively will try together to give you a little bit of an insight about how we do this for our clients. How many people in the room already work with investors and people? Just put your hands up. So we actually scanned the list of delegates, and we think about 15 to 20% are already know of investors and people or work directly with them. I would say that statistic is probably not the same for Yoke. So we'll give you a little bit of an introduction about how we create effective wellbeing strategies that then lead into investors and people standards. So our approach is simple, but my background is in human capital consulting, but it's interestingly how basic consulting principles aren't applied to well-being. So, for example, the amount of clients that come to us who say we've invested in 18 months of programs and we're coming along with our uptake rate, and it's usually single figures, and they can't figure out why. Well, first of all, you have to understand what your people perceive as well-being. And this is why we're going to do our breakout exercise to help you with 4 key characters in an organisation. But most of the time, people just forget to ask. And instead, the HR team or whoever is deciding to personally sponsor that, sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's head of occupational health, are in a little darkened room sketching out what they think well-being means. And if you look on certain websites, well-being is a state of being well. It's not exactly an exciting interpretation of the definition. But depending on the age, the culture, the sector of your organisation, it will mean different things. So it's important to start with asking. We'll come on to a little bit more about that in a minute, because it's a difficult question for you to ask if you're already within that organisation. And then effectively, which we won't touch on today, the way that Yoke works is mapping that very clearly to your existing business strategy. And this is something where people miss the opportunity to do, and therefore it doesn't become a sustainable program. But it's very easy when you can slowly create the right story to do that, and therefore you naturally get different stakeholders involved. And finally, doing something about it, and this is where investors and people's methodology is very strict. Yes, do something, but do something in an engaging manner. Make sure leaderships are transparently and visibly involved, but also acknowledge that you've got to keep trying, keep measuring, keep moving forward. So specifically then, freeze. I nearly broke out into, I should just say that Simon on the front row, it's his birthday today, so maybe we should just, happy birthday, Simon. I was going to do a little bit of an interlude then in case you got stuck. So we're going to move now on to that first part that Yoke works on, the assess. So meeting the needs of your people. I mean, the classic thing is, maybe I should ask for hands up, how many of you in the room are doing something around well-being, but you don't actually know if it's hitting the spot, or you haven't asked your people? It's probably about 70%, which is quite interesting. And how many of you in the room actually have a well-being strategy? 4 hands. So it's quite an interesting reflection, isn't it? Yet we have a strategy for everything else. So what we see as Yoke is that actually it's probably an afterthought for 2 main reasons. Because, as HR directors, your list of to-dos are so long that it's yet another thing, and I just don't have the time to actually do it. Or, when you start getting into the unknown legal risk around it, they're sensitive conversations. You don't quite know how to start to navigate that landscape. So that's why usually you can work with an organisation that's potentially independent to help you figure out what well-being means to your organisation. It's also a new space. There isn't really clearly, credible leaders in this space yet, because people are just either starting to do it in-house, or it's a relatively new industry that there isn't, years of experience in. So rather than just sort of accepting that low uptake from a yoga class is as it comes and people just don't want well-being in our organisation, or that there's a plethora of people that are cynical in your organisation that will never come to that yoga class, we decided to do something different. So I want you all to really embody 4 key players that we regularly come across that are touched by well-being. To start with, the thriving individual. So you'll see a little bit of a lens as to the organisations we work with, but in some organisations we don't call well-being well-being because we're coming at it from a perspective of understanding who needs this programme. And if you have a culture of thriving organisations or thriving individuals, then actually something like sustainable performance can be far more of an accessible term for them. You need to get into that mind space. But then often, in step 2, or the individual 2, is a struggling individual. And that's often actually what we've talked about in the room next door. You know, we all have mental health, but we often look at the people that are struggling. And that's right to do, but you've also got to look at well-being as an opportunity to help your talent move forward. And then the owner of well-being, or the potential future owner of well-being, the HR director, and really getting into their mindset of why is it important? And finally, someone who is a potential ally, but usually the most sceptical about the situation, the finance director. But this is a story that you need to start to understand what well-being means to all of them to create an effective well-being strategy.
So just to quickly introduce our topic of discussion for our workshop is you'll have 4 stakeholders, that's myself, Rachel, Liam and Nikki. We'll give you a 30-second introduction on your stakeholder. And then what we'd like you to do is spend 15 minutes sketching and playing back in terms of what does well-being mean to this person in particular? What does it mean to them? So what I'd like you to do is everyone today kindly received a sticker, a colourful sticker. At the front we've got orange. At the back we've got green and we also have blue. We've had to make some adjustments. So the red board is now outside. If you go through the back door there, we potentially might let you back in the next 10 to 15 minutes. But if you could kindly rise up off your feet, off your chairs, make your way to the colour sticker that you have, and then we'll have a quick session. So, as Rachel kindly mentioned, we all had different stakeholders. Our stakeholder was a struggling individual. And this is what the group found out about the struggling individual. Struggling with anxiety at work, has not shared struggles with family, friends or colleagues, low confidence, feels pressure from line manager to wear a mask. Feels pressure from line manager to wear a mask. And fearful of being found out or made redundant. I feel like I'm a failure. That's what our group discussed. So I'll hand over to Simon for a quick playback.
Right. You can all sing happy birthday first. No, don't. Well, we threw out a number of ideas on what well-being means, and one of them was a sort of feeling of being out of control, no time to think, nobody to go to, but also looking at antidotes like coping strategies. So if you like, there was a negative side and there was a positive side to it. Being able to speak to somebody you trust, being able to come into the workplace and actually admit that this sort of weakness is there. And I think if we look at the head of Lloyds Bank who had to take time off because of stress, probably sort of brought to the headlines that it's actually the people at the top of the organisation who can suffer just as much as anyone else. We then we looked at this grid, which has there's 4 areas here. The organisation, in terms of the organisation, what's the impact? Performance, culture, risk and strategy. I'll just take one idea from each. Performance, manic and overperforming. I think this was quite interesting that actually some people who are in a very bad way emotionally or psychologically may actually be overperforming, but whether that's sustainable is another matter. In terms of the culture, what's happening? Well, it's having somebody in the organisation who is not well, is demotivating for others, sort of spreads negativity. What's the risk? Burnout, clearly from the manic as well. Mistakes being made. We've seen some quite high-profile cases, actually, where people have been very dishonest in organisations. I mean, Nick Leeson was probably the earliest of those. And strategy, what does it do for the organisation? Creates more focus as to what to do when things go wrong.
Thank you so much, Simon. I'll hand over to the blue group.
Great. Hi, I'm Rachel, but you know that already. I'm a finance director. I'm basically interested in the numbers. We talked a lot about my personality type. I like to deal with my well-being in my own time when I have it, but I don't bring anything to do with it to work, and I expect my team to do the same.
Thank you. So we were looking at some of what well-being meant. There was a difference between in the organisation. It was around cost, it was around absenteeism and some of the hard stats. And then in the personal, it was much more about the individual well-being, yoga, etc. So that divorce of the two, and therefore seeing well-being in an organisational sense around stats, and actually not recognising the individual side of things as well. So when we went on to kind of performance culture, risk and strategy, we kind of talked a lot around the difference in terms of the private and the public, and the culture of trying to get ahead and being seen to be performing and continual improvement, and how that drove the response to stress, because the organisation wasn't culturally there in terms of looking at well-being. So because there wasn't that space, it then drove the performance culture even stronger, to even greater detriment, until we got to a kind of tipping point, which is how many people needed to leave the team before actually the finance director went, actually I might have to have a look at this, because recruitment costs are going up and knowledge is going out the door.
I should just say thank you very much, Andrea from ActionAid.
Hello, hi, I'm Nikki, and I'm a high potential thriving individual who, I loved it. My team came up with Wellbeing Schmelbeing was basically what we thought. And my mantra is I'll sleep when I die, very low self-awareness, and highly competitive.
Fab. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lisa. So just to quickly summarise in terms of what we come up with. So generally in terms of this individual, they would be a very high-performing individual, somebody with very high energy, great can-do attitude, just get on with it, make things happen, gets results. In terms of the culture, not really embracing that whole team kind of ethic, very focused on maybe themselves and what well-being means or doesn't mean to them, but maybe not so much of an appreciation as to what it means for everybody else. Can be maybe quite negative, quite cynical about it all. In terms of risks, in terms of their contribution, how can they sustain that kind of moving forward? At what point do they burn out again? When does it all just become a bit too much? And also just thinking about the effect really on the team. So when we started to think about the strategy piece, it was around actually what does your organisation want to recognise? Does it really focus on the what you're doing, or is it also focusing on the how you go about doing that as well? And obviously the impact on the wider team. So how do we coach those individuals and ensure that we have fair representation across the organisation?
That's wonderful, and just to hurt everybody's necks.
Hi everyone. Firstly, I completely forgot to nominate someone with a green sticker to talk us through the activity. So if anyone would like to quickly do that now. Anyone with a green sticker that would like to talk through it? No? Great. Okay, wonderful, thank you. So we had the HR director character. So this person, 25 years of experience in the field, a fantastic passion for well-being as part of their role. To-do list is unrealistic and time-pressured, so that it's kind of on the back burner. It really needs to be done, but it's just having the kind of time to go through it all. Sees the potential but struggles to find time to think of it. Aware of cynicism within the rest of the team and maybe the senior leadership team, and struggles to prioritise his well-being outside of his work. So generally, feels like it's a bit of a firefighter within the organisation.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Shalina, work on the Healthy Workplace Charter. So this HR director is pretty torn because you've got the professional side wanting to look at things like sustainability, high performance, mitigation, litigation, absenteeism, presenteeism. And then personally, you can also see that this person doesn't have time to do everything, so is aware of a duty of care to individuals, sometimes forgets it about themselves, and wants to be involved in, wants to be motivated, although highly stressed, wants to be engaged with the organisation, wants to feel resilient, and actually wants a work-life balance again, and understand the needs of themselves as well as the organisation, and being productive, in summary. Regarding performance, we talked about exceeding expectations, performance management, sickness absenteeism, but also presenteeism, because that is a cost to the organisation financially and also emotionally to the individuals. We talked about retaining people and occupational health, the importance of them as well, and about focus. The other group mentioned focus as well. We found that comes under performance, it comes under strategy as well, and in other areas. Regarding culture, we need engagement, we need corporate support, so support from top down, otherwise nothing will happen. We need buy-in, we need it to be valued, know what the values of the organisation are so that they can be implemented. It's all very well having policies and procedures in place, but how is it actually implemented and also communicated? So what are the different methods of communication? Not just having a voice through an employment survey, which is perhaps annually if we're lucky, but throughout the year, which will then also entice loyalty from your employees. Regarding risk, well, there's always cost from absenteeism, presenteeism, retaining good staff, the reputation of the organisation, health and safety, that comes into a lot of areas, mitigation, litigation planning, and staff turnover. And quickly on strategy, about being creative, actually have a health and wellbeing strategy. I think we saw at the beginning, there's only like 4 hands had a strategy. So it's developing this, putting it into place, ownership, engagement, taking responsibility, and again, having your gap and a needs analysis.
I think what you begin to get, and what we often find when we do this exercise, is each person has a very different cluster and interpretation of well-being. And therefore, it also outlines very clearly the tension between personal well-being and organisational well-being. And managing and recognising this tension is part of the process. Many of us, albeit Yoke has our own 7-domain framework, another framework for well-being which is aligned to investors and people, but many people purely place their effort here and forget about connecting it to the organisation. It's very difficult to change behaviours unless you acknowledge that tension that competes between the two. It's also, in this step 3, very hard to persuade leaders to properly, sustainably support you in what you're trying to achieve unless you acknowledge how it influences them, hence the 4 key areas of performance, culture, risk and strategy.
So just on to step 4, maintaining and improving well-being. Just to let you know, well-being is a practice. We didn't come here expecting everyone to have something that's in place. We understand it's something that we have to continually build on. So it's a practice for people and also for organisations.
We're coming up to time. It goes really quickly. But what we tried to kind of very briefly in the half an hour that we have with you today is show you that really it's worth taking the effort and the energy to think about what you're doing and what your people need before doing it. We've actually got a short summary video from CBI, who we currently both work with, who've been through the whole process. And they said they feel like they've saved themselves a lot of money by taking their time and figuring out what their strategy is first. We'll send this through as a follow-up because we haven't got time to do that now. But it's really worth watching, and it also highlights the challenges around how they, in particular, manage to get, albeit over time, the leadership support they need. And we now have a 2.5-year rolling programme with them. So it's worth doing the groundwork for. So creating an effective strategy in a mindful fashion, really thinking about what your people need and shock are asking them, and then making sure the last 2 very brief points are getting leadership support and finally, acknowledging how many of us woke up today thinking, again, I've nailed well-being personally. It's very few of us, and we wake up and we try each day, so we have to have the same outlook and manage other people's expectations around well-being in the workplace, around that philosophy as well.